I just read an article in the Concord Monitor, which is my local newspaper here in New Hampshire, and it was about a woman who had filed for a protective order. There have been 3 homicides in the past 12 months or so here in New Hampshire that were domestic violence related, spouse against spouse, boyfriend against girlfriend, that sort of thing. In each case, a restraining order was in place. So what is a restraining order, you ask? Well, let me use episode 218 to explain my experience with restraining orders, why they're necessary and why they don't really work. The newspaper article chronicled a woman who had been dating a guy. They were 3 or 4 months into their relationship, and he asked her to do something sexually that she was uncomfortable with, and she said no. And he beat her up for not doing what he said. That seems like a pretty black and white case of getting a restraining order. And as she found out more about this gentleman's background, she realized he had a criminal history. So the police tried to keep the guy in custody. And the judge said no, release him on bail. He has a restraining order in place. Everything's fine. Except a restraining order is a piece of paper. And there's a line in a Chicks song, the band that used to be called the Dixie Chicks. Earl walked right through that restraining order and put her in intensive care. It's a song called Earl. It's actually a really catchy song with a really, really dark storyline. I had never even really heard of a restraining order other than maybe on TV and such for most of my adult life, and certainly never had any experience in needing one. I talked last week about Science Guy dying and my relationship with him and how it was such an ugly ending to it after years and years and years of knowing one another and, having positive and negative interactions. I was, forced by my then Concord High principal and later superintendent Chris Rath to share my story and to sort of justify me not losing my job. Because I should lose my job for telling the truth about something that happened to me. At any rate, shortly after I did that, I started to get harassed, not directly by Science Guy, but by people who would yell out his name or call me names as they drove by in cars and things like that. 3 episodes I remember specifically. One was early in the morning or late at night. It was night. I was in bed, and a car went screeching by my apartment, and people screamed and yelled. Another time, a car went by, and there was screeching and yelling, but nothing discernible word-wise, and somebody threw something at my window, and it didn't break the window, but it scared me. And then the third time, I was out running, and the car swerved right at me and almost knocked me right off the road. I sought a restraining order. I went to Chris Rath, because she was in the school district, and said, look, I helped you, and now I'm being harassed. And so she suggested I go to the police, which I did, and they suggested I get a restraining order. So my good friend Megan, her dad Dan, was an attorney, and so he represented me there. Most often, you don't have an attorney with you at a restraining order. You stand side by side with the person you're afraid of in front of a judge, and you each share your stories. I had, my attorney ask me questions and share my story. And I remember Bruce was there, and he came with some friends, and he talked in this sort of Irish brogue for the most of the time he was talking. And I remember him joking back and forth with the judge about his name and where it came from and all this. And I remember feeling very, very uneasy that I was like this lone girl in this men's club of humor back and forth. And I don't know that that's at all what it was like, but that's how it felt. Bruce obviously denied any of these things as being connected to him, even though the names yelled at me were his name. I truly believe that he just could have been hanging out with hooligans who were not acting well. They were protecting their friend. But, I didn't know who those people were. I was granted the restraining order, and I never heard from Bruce again. And that was a terrible way to end something that was so profoundly important to me. But at the time, I felt like I had no choice. And I did feel protected because I did feel that he wouldn't try to walk through it, that wasn't who he was. And he probably told his friends to cut it out. He left town shortly thereafter, and as I've said before, that was it. We never, ever spoke again. I had nothing to do with restraining orders for a long, long time after that. And it wasn't until my friendship with Crazy Amy that the restraining order reality came back into play. Without getting too personal into her story, the bottom line was she was very much wanting to leave her relationship. And she painted a picture to me of pretty extensive domestic violence. She showed me some medical forms she had written that she checked off she didn't feel safe. And she would share these things with me in conversation, but then weeks and weeks would go by and everything was fine, and it didn't seem that way. A couple of times she called me on the phone to chat, and then she would say, I want you to listen, and she'd put the phone down, and Roy would be screaming at her. Now, when you're in the middle of a fight, I'm going to try to be fair on both sides here because I'm telling a story that's not mine, and I wasn't in that kitchen. But I do know that what I heard was terrifying. And then she gave me some specific story examples, bruise on her head and other things. So she asked me, after a lot of conversations around it, would I go with her to help her get a restraining order, which I did. I sat with her. You go to the court and you fill it out, and it's temporary. So she had done that part. And I remember she called me on the phone the night that Ro would have gotten back from a trip. She was in the window, looking out the window, and I was on the phone with her. And at this time, I was 100% in her corner. She described to me him pulling up, getting out of his car, the police showing up, him throwing his hands in the air and then bending over and touching his knees. She painted a very graphic picture of what that must have been like for him. And a year later, probably a year and a half later, I heard the other side of that story from Roy. I share it as my story because I was a huge part of it. And in the week between the initial giving of the protective order and the court hearing, I helped Amy, be strong and prepared and fight for herself and all this. We showed up at court and I was sitting with her. I was her advocate, and he came with an attorney. We didn't have one. I was just there together with Amy. What I remember the most is that Roy didn't fight the restraining order. And he had logical reasons why a year later when we discussed this again, but he didn't fight it. He accepted it. And to me, that was hardcore evidence that her allegations were true and that he didn't want to fight it. I found that odd because I wouldn't imagine anybody would want to have an active protective order against them. It's not helpful. You have to be honest about these things. They're filed, they're public knowledge and public view. Anyone can find out who has restraining orders. And it was not 2 weeks after that I realized, based on Amy's behavior and all that was going on in her home, that I'd been completely played. My anger with her at this was that by manipulating the system for your own gain, you hurt it for people who actually need them. And the judges sitting behind the bench, after hearing things over and over and over again, and sometimes it's true and sometimes it isn't, when somebody lies about assault, any kind of assault, whatever their motivation, it hurts all the people that aren't lying when they come forward to tell their stories. So during the year that restraining order was in place, I began to be a bit afraid of the whole situation. And I extricated myself from her life, which was very hard on me at the time. And I've talked about that in all my episodes around this part of my life. When Roy returned to town, I remember feeling quite reluctant to say anything. I had reached out a couple of times during the year through social media. I didn't have a cell phone number for him or anything like that. And I remember him sharing with me that I had reached out once, and a woman he was dating at the time said, no, don't. She's tricking you. She's tricking you. And why wouldn't he think that, right? I had been good friends with Amy. I had sat with her in the courtroom. So it was profound. So when we reconnected and we discussed it, I explained how, from my perspective, it was manipulation of the court system, using a restraining order as a manipulative tool. And the picture painted to me by Roy, and then evidenced by all the years I spent connected to Roy, to a certain extent, made it very, very clear that that restraining order was a pile of crap. That was my first experience with the restraining order process. In all the contentiousness of his divorce and all that went on publicly with my subsequent job loss, my personal safety was a problem more than once. During that first year that Roy was back, and they were going through their initial divorce hearings and all that, Amy's boyfriend, Bob, hated me, had this vicious hatred for me. He would send emails to Roy and reference me. So there was this whole email back and forth with them, which it wasn't my divorce. It was none of my business. But I was pulled into it. And some of the emails were threatening, extremely threatening. My personal safety, I should watch out for my kids. Comments like this. Bob would call Kenny's cell phone and leave untrue, disgusting voicemails. Looking back now, I feel, having now experienced this with Roy, we'll get to my number 3 restraining order story. I think that now there was a lot of communication between Amy and Roy that I was not privy to, which fed the anger in Bob and the threats to me. It was like some weird soup or stew that was being stirred up all the time. So the restraining order I helped Amy with was the spring of 2008. And then I went with Roy to court and we filed a restraining order against Amy and Bob. And the reason I filed it was because of the threatening emails. Now, I was new to this. I just wanted to tell the judge why I was afraid and that I wasn't trying to cause trouble. But I remember Roy said, no, you need to be prepared. And he had me like photocopy emails and documents and create this whole case. When I was going through this, Morgan was still in the same grade as Gracie. And so there was still a lot of contact in the school day between me and Amy. And that was always often uncomfortable. And the school was well aware of it. When I had done my sabbatical, there was a lot of uncomfortable behavior as well. That was the prior year. I remember going to the principal of Kimball School at the time, and she recommended to me that I keep everything on school district email because it was public email and it would be accessible and it would be unerasable. And so I had all my communications with her on my school district email. I remember when Roy was helping me put together everything for the restraining order hearing, he always wanted to make sure that the heading of the email showed. Now, in hindsight, this should have been a red flag for me. He was very, very, very insistent that the public email show. Here's the thing about a public email, government email, anything like that is it's not considered private. It's privy to right to know. Anyone can request information and email. It's not private. I didn't think anything of this at the time. I would come to see that I was careless with my school district email. The hearing came and went, and what it came out to was Amy and Bob sitting at one table telling the judge all these things about me that had nothing to do with them, like how I was a bad person, that I had had all these relationships, that I had not been a good friend, like nothing to do with them being afraid of me or why my allegations were false. It was stunning gaslighting and word salad, just all this gobbledygook that was just a distraction. And rather than ignore that and simply stick to why I was intimidated, the 2 or 3 things that had happened, the threatening email, the mistruths and such, I fought back their arguments. I made a list of what they said and I fought back. And they had included all sorts of emails and things like this. And you have to share with each other what you're sharing with the judge. So I got her emails and she got mine, everything that we were sharing. And when the hearing was over, I should have taken, excuse me, can I have my emails back? Here's yours. And I didn't because I wanted to see what she had written. But that meant she had to keep mine. So she kept all those school district emails. That restraining order we didn't get that restraining order. And that was sort of like a big joke to them. Shortly after that, they filed a restraining order against Roy. So we had to go back into court and fight again. And at this time, I was feeling like, look, this is ridiculous. Like, this is insane. You know, restraining orders are here for a reason. You have to feel that your personal safety is threatened. And what it seemed to be like between these two was a manipulative tool. If you don't do what I say, I'm going to file a restraining order. We had the same judge every time. During Roy's divorce hearing, Bob's behavior was so erratic that it was noticed by the judge and the bailiff. And the bailiff had a recollection of me filing for a restraining order against them and was very concerned about my safety and everything at the conclusion of that hearing. But everything was fine. And it was that summer that Amy went to Chris Rath with all those emails. And what she said was, she's using these to harass me. We actually filed a restraining order against her, leaving out the fact that she had sent all sorts of horrible emails to me. She said she was afraid of me. She feared for the safety of her family. The timing of this with my speaking out against the building demolitions was all Chris Rath needed to really secure her hatred of me. And in my meeting with her, the biggest point she made that was a threat to me was, if you retaliate, I will fire you. You will lose your job. And I remember sitting there and just feeling so powerless, like I tried to help somebody. Yes, I got involved in a completely irresponsible and inappropriate relationship with this person, but I didn't come at it from a mean point of view. I wanted to help 2 little girls. After the job loss, I remember hearing about it from Teresa, Amy's oldest daughter, and how they danced around the kitchen. They thought they celebrated the fact that they'd cost me a 20-year teaching career. This was funny to them. And I took note of it. And I was just so wrecked and devastated at that point, nothing could hurt me. It was shortly after this, I would say probably 2012. I believe I was on the school board by now. I'd lost my job for a while now, and I was rebuilding my life. I got a call from the Concord Monitor from a reporter asking if I wanted to publish my letter as it was written because there were some typos and things in it. And I said, what letter? And she said, well, the email you sent. And I said, I haven't sent an email. So she sent me a copy of the email. And Bob had taken my email, which is run to win 893, and just done run to win. Like, so it was similar enough that the monitor might think it was me. And he had written a letter that I would never write that was blasting something and would have made me look really, really stupid as a school board member and a couple of other things. And so I said, I didn't write this letter. So now you have Amy and Roy taking, she's already cost me my job, right? If there was ever a reason to have a restraining order, if the first one should have been approved, this is evidence. Now I have somebody that's willing to make believe they're me, like cyberbully. It's a whole different beast. So I took this information and I have a friend of mine that is good at tracking IP addresses, and he got a friend for me. There were 2 emails sent to the monitor, and they both pinged off towers that were close to where Bob worked. And so I took this information and I filed for a restraining order. So here we are now. It's like number 3, visits to the court, right? It was at this point that I noticed that this whole process was like exciting to Roy. Like it was like, let's go, let's do this, let's go, let's do this. And I just wanted all of this to stop. I didn't like any of this. I was worried for my safety. I was worried for my family and my kids. But I, this time, got good advice from legal aid around sticking to the statute. And the statute is all about the fear that you feel and the actions that credibly cause you to be afraid. So not surprisingly, Amy would have nothing to do. She didn't stand by Bob this time. She didn't even go with him this time, which I found very telling and too bad for him. But he was on his own for this one because he had sent the emails. And I'm quite sure she didn't want to be connected to it in any way. The ultimate pot stirrer. And he did the same thing. He started listing all these rumors about me and things that everything he said came from Amy's mouth, which means it was a complete lie or misinterpretation of the truth or her version of whatever she wanted people to think. It was ugly. The things he said were ugly. And I turned and I said, I don't understand how my reputation affects him at all. He's talking about me, and he's talking about things that he's brought up at other restraining order hearings, and this is ridiculous. He sent these emails. I explained where the towers they were pinged off. It's him. He did this. There were things in the email that only he could have written. I was granted that protective order. He appealed it. So now I look at somebody who claims they didn't do the abuse, Roy, who doesn't even fight the restraining order. And then you have someone that absolutely did do what he was accused of doing, and he fights it and wants to appeal it. So I probably spent a good 35 to 40 hours of my life getting recordings, listening to the words. The process to appeal, to fight an appeal, is significant, and it was exhausting. It goes to the state Supreme Court. I spent hours on it, hours that I didn't have or want to spend on this. And Bob ended up pulling back on his appeal. He couldn't function or handle or he thought he might lose. And I think if he lost, there could be repercussions for him. So that was it. That was the end of my restraining order life. But how I felt about that was that had I understood how to protect myself the first time around, I likely would have received protective order, which would have negated the following ones. The second one, they wouldn't have filed because they couldn't have. And then mine might not have happened. I do know that the misguidance I received on how to protect myself was profound. Why am I sharing and resharing these stories? Because my relationship with Roy and the reasons protective orders even came into play are such a classic example of emotional and narcissistic abuse, the manipulation and the word salad and the finger pointing, not just to me, but those two amongst each other. And it's situations like this, people crying wolf, when there really is no reason to be afraid, that causes judges to shake their heads. I will say, in our last time there, he said, you guys are well-dressed, well-educated people. What are you doing? Stop bothering each other. Live your lives. He really lectured us all. And I felt bad. I felt that always me, feeling bad about being victimized by someone else, but I felt terrible. When I had gone through the process about Bruce, I had people throwing rocks at my house and driving me off the road. So those were pretty cut and dry instances of threat. Emotional threats are a bit trickier. Years go by, Amy moves on, we all move on, Molly dies, my life falls apart. And in the process of dealing with Molly's death, I've talked about reconnecting with Roy. And we spent, for the first couple of years after she died, he was heavily dating other people, and we still had weekends together here and there. We'd connect and spend a night together, or a day together, or a couple of days. But he was always very distinctly involved with someone else, and there was nothing to it, and that was fine. We met for lunch quite a bit. I remember he had gotten into this big serious relationship that meant we could only just, just sort of be friends and that whatever, that was all fine. And then we sort of got back together, not in any official way, but we spent a lot of time together. Over the years, I had given or lent to Roy several important things from my family, some Christmas ornaments, which I've gotten back, and a lamp and a ceramic basin and pitcher that belonged to my grandparents. And I always said to him, don't ever lose those because they're mine, and he would, sort of push on me and all. So shortly after Jack was born, when behavior between Roy and I became pretty erratic, and he was reverting to his calling me up like everything was fine, and then telling me to go fuck myself, the next day, and just that erratic, unstable behavior. And of course, I had a bit of postpartum depression at the time, and nothing was good. It was like the perfect storm of bad. So I finally just said, look, let's just end it once and for all. I'd like to come down and get my lamp and my pitcher. To which he said, those are mine. You can't have them back. I'm not giving them back. So I got really angry and I said, I'm going to come down there. And he was sort of starting a new relationship. And he had told me all about this person, many details of her life that were none of my business. And I remember thinking, you know what, I'm going to warn her. And I sent her an email and I laid out everything that had been going on. And he called me like at 2 a.m. and screaming and yelling at me for doing that. And it was not nice of me to do. He screamed and yelled and threatened, you're going to be sorry you did this. And the way that he punished me was by going to Newbury District Court and applying for a restraining order. Because I asked for my stuff back and I sent an email describing his behavior to his new girlfriend. Now, he claimed that she felt threatened and intimidated by it. I could read that email right here. I probably should, but it contains a lot of personal information that I don't feel comfortable sharing. It's personal information about other people. And so I didn't realize that he had done that until I got the notice in the mail. I remember when I opened the door, well, we had had a couple of phone conversations and he'd say hello and answer kind of funny. I'd be like, hi. He's like, anything you want to talk about? I'd say, no, should I, what? So it was clear on his end that I hadn't yet received the letter. I remember hanging up from him and then going to get the mail and seeing Newburyport Court like that return address and realizing, oh my God, and opening it up. And I sat down and I thought of the night that Amy described looking out the window and Roy's reaction when the police handed him a restraining order. And I'm like, oh my God, I know exactly how he feels. And so I sat down and I just looked at it and I was dumbstruck. Now, again, Massachusetts is no different than New Hampshire. You have to prove that you feel threatened, that you're worried about your safety. There's nothing about me that can make Roy feel unsafe. And so I had to truck myself down to Newburyport for an 8 a.m. hearing. Jack was like 4 months old, or maybe 6 months old at the most. It wasn't easy. I had to be secretive about it. And I remember trying to channel the advice had been given from the legal people, apologizing to the judge. He is not afraid of me, Your Honor. He's mad at me. I have volumes of text messages here if you'd like to look through these things. All of our conversations in the 2 weeks prior to him setting up this restraining order hearing. And so, he went back and forth. And Roy had been on the phone a couple of times. He'd gotten up out of the courtroom to talk and come back. And he looked over at me and smirked. In that restraining order hearing, now keep in mind, I didn't even really know that Amy and Roy talked as much as they did. He would share that they did, that they still talked quite a bit. I don't know how Bob feels about that or if he even knows. I'm sure it's painted in a way that makes it okay. But I remember once sitting with Roy watching TV and him looking at me and saying, Amy says you're a compulsive liar. I shouldn't believe anything you say. And I looked at him like, why are you talking to Amy about me? Like, what the hell? What? Like I sort of I just sort of blew it off, and I made fun of him. Oh, is she your confidant now? Like, really? After all she did to you? Or you claim she did to you? So long story short, all that back and forth, he says to the judge, I got a copy of this hearing so I could hear the words. And he stood there and said to the judge, I just got off the phone with Amy, and he gave her last name, and explained how this is what she wanted the judge to know. And it was this dictated, please grant this protective order. I fear for my life from her. She has been violent and this, all this. I stood there dumbfounded. Like, I lost my job for you. I lost everything for you because of her. And now you're siding with her because I outed you to your girlfriend and I want my stuff back. So basically that's what I said to the judge. I said, here's my phone. I'll open it up to my conversations with the woman he's talking about. We share a friend who lost a child. That's the only conversations I've had with her in here. And I said, may I approach and give you my phone? I want you to look at it. He said, no, if you're willing to give it to me, I believe you. And he didn't grant the order. He basically told Roy he should give me my stuff back, which he has not, and said, don't waste my time. And I had apologized already about this being a waste of time. When I read the article in the Concord Monitor a couple of days ago, all of this came flooding back to me because it's things like this. It's women who lie about domestic violence and get restraining orders against people who didn't do it. It's people like Roy that use restraining orders as a control mechanism. If you don't do what I say, I'm going to get a restraining order, which is basically, he actually used those words several times. When I was scrolling my email earlier today, the status of women and girls in New Hampshire, there's a big yearly report and it came out. And one of the biggest markers between men and women, male-bodied people and female-bodied people, I want to be clear on that delineation for the purpose of this conversation, is the disproportionately higher rate of women getting assaulted and abused and murdered by their significant other or male family members. It's when people use these things inappropriately that the people that need them suffer the most. And that's how I felt about it. I would love to sit and have a heart-to-heart with Amy and Roy about our whole restraining order dance and really see where they come from and what they're thinking. I know that it's never going to happen. I know that in current society, where so much is based on violence and stereotypes and forcing people to submit and violent disagreement, that restraining orders are here to stay. And I think that they do serve a good purpose. My protective order attempts and sharing of what was happening to me did not prevent me from losing my job. It did not prevent me from public humiliation. It did not get me my stuff back. If I had it to do all over again, I would never have allowed Roy to talk me into filing that first restraining order. Because when I look at how double-sided this whole situation is, the fact that Amy got a restraining order against him and his reaction to it was just the same as my reaction to the one he got against me. I feel like it's how you get back at each other. Like it was just a big game of he said, she said, you said, they said, in the almost decade-long time I spent with, over a decade, embroiled with Roy and that family. I spill the tea on this because it's worthwhile for any of you that listen to this podcast to do some research on restraining orders and protective orders, how you get them, what they mean, how many people have died while being protected by a restraining order. Oftentimes, it's the restraining order that provokes the person to commit the murder or the assault. And that's also very, very common. In spilling the tea here, I'm mostly saying that I feel that my situation, the situation I was a part of, contributes to the problem of why restraining orders are ineffective. What a waste of time all of this was in the court system. None of us were going to be murdered or killed. Well, hopefully not, right? The most egregious, sending a letter to a newspaper saying it's mine, cyberbullying and cybercrime is huge now and very, very easy to do. So I'm glad that I went forward with it. I think maybe simply going to the police and seeing if I could press charges might have made more sense than the protective order route, but that's the route I took. I might do it differently if I had to do it again. At the phase of my life where I'm trying to not constantly come back to things over and over again, I guess my main function in sharing this is to be really raw and honest about the whole process of a restraining order, that they're important to get if you need one. Seeking help and advice and support is hugely important in anything. As we approach November 2025, with all the benefits that will soon be cut, with the number of people that will face chronic hunger and homelessness, and the effects of that on the economy, we are looking at some troubling times. That's Barb's restraining order history. Both dealing with men in my relationships too, and the circumstances around what happened with those men. I don't know, it's tough times. I sincerely hope the woman in the newspaper does not get hurt by her ex-boyfriend. I hope that she is safe. And then we aren't looking at one more assault or murder that didn't need to happen. I haven't dated anybody in 5 years, so hopefully that will prevent my need for filing for a restraining order against anyone else. I do know that part of my job loss situation and my anger at Chris Rath is that she allowed a very manipulative, dangerous person to continue to hurt me. That makes me angry. I see that as a big flaw in our system. I hope that none of you listening ever need to get a restraining order. If you have ever had one, I would be very interested in your story and how that went, or if you've been on the receiving end of one. In reliving my most recent restraining order experience with Roy, I wish I had thought to say that the state of New Hampshire awarded that woman a restraining order against him. He's talking to a woman that filed for a restraining order against him, because it would have illustrated so beautifully how these two people manipulate the law that way and pull people in with them. Earl walked right through that restraining order and put her in intensive care. That's an intense song. So listen, be good to yourself. Thoroughly vet your significant others so that you don't end up needing a restraining order. Be good to someone else. Reach out and help somebody if you see they need it. And as always, have a good day, everybody. Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at Barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.